My name is Julia. I'm 27 years old and I work for a small interior design firm in Seattle. I have a stressful job, but I love it. It's one of the few things in my life that I can choose for myself. Otherwise, well, in my own family, I have practically no right to vote. I have an older sister named Melissa, who is 4 years older than me. She is married and has 3 triplet sons, all 6 years old. Melissa is a person who makes the whole world revolve around her. And for some reason, my parents think it's perfectly reasonable. As for me, I'm always a backup plan. Babysitter when I'm free, babysitter when I'm tired, and even when I'm trying to have fun, I somehow find myself back in my aunt's service. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Last year, the whole family and I vacationed on the Oregon coast, and I was looking forward to this trip. I asked for an early day off from work, looking forward to walking along the beach, visiting the coastal coffee shops, and especially visiting an art exhibition that I had missed for years. Mom said she would book a hotel for the whole family, and that this time I would really be able to relax. Sounds great, doesn't it? But when we arrived, I found out that I would have to share a room with 3 boys, while Melissa and her husband would have their own room with a balcony overlooking the ocean. I barely had time to react before my mom handed me the key and smiled. "The boys love you, Julia. They won't cause any trouble." No problem at all. That first night, one of them was crying over a missing teddy bear. Another one was running around in circles looking for the TV remote control, and the third one asked me 5 times if he could have a snack at midnight. I was exhausted and barely slept. I lay awake in a dark room, listening to heavy breathing and soft snoring, and I wanted to disappear. That was the moment when I realized that nothing would change. The next morning, I tried to set aside at least 1 hour to visit the exhibition, the only thing I really wanted to do on this trip. But when I finished getting dressed, Melissa texted me, "Where are you going?" "Josh is about to leave. Can you watch the kids for a bit?" It took almost 3 hours. When I talked to my mom about it, she said softly, "You're staying for free, honey. It's only fair if you help a little." I wanted to shout, "Are you free?" I didn't stay with anyone. I have a job to do. I am independent. I paid for the bus ticket myself and took a paid vacation just to be here. But every time I tried to resist, I was met with disapproving footsteps. I felt like a stranger in my own family. My mother's gaze, as always, was full of that indescribable sympathy that invariably turned any of my arguments into nothing. She didn't judge me, she just didn't understand. And I understood too well. My life, my desires, are just minor details that no one is interested in. And at such moments, I felt really lonely, not in the physical sense, but in some deep inner way, when you realize that you don't have enough space even for a simple existence. I only got to the beach once during the entire trip, and that was in the early morning, when the boys were still asleep, and I could hope for at least a few minutes of silence. While Melissa posted daily photos from spas, cafes, and even a foot massage parlor, where she had fun and enjoyed her vacation without hesitation, I spent most of my time cleaning up cookie crumbs, changing the children's clothes, and answering Aunt Julia's endless stream of questions. "May I?" "And where's Mom?" That was my reality. I didn't even feel right to say that I was tired, that I wanted to be myself for at least a moment, not a hostage to obligations. I didn't feel like a part of the family, but rather like an auxiliary person who exists only to make everything convenient, to please everyone. At such moments, I wanted to disappear, but I stayed because I couldn't do anything else. I didn't say much back then. I just silently packed my things, and when the trip was over, I promised myself that there would not be a second time. But I was wrong. There's another family trip coming up this year, and my parents are already planning for everything to go the same way as before. Everything will be as always, according to their rules, according to their plan, and I will again be the one who provides peace and convenience for everyone else. No one asked me anything. They just sent a route and a message. Summer trip. We will all go together, as we do every year. I looked at the message in the family group chat. My hands were shaking. The pain in his chest and the lump in his throat were getting worse. What if I refuse? What if I finally say that I can no longer be the one who always gives in? What if I tell you that I want to be happy too, and not just serve all my family like a restless shadow? But then I remembered their faces again, their expectations, and, as always, I decided to remain silent. Do they really think I'm going to go back to being a babysitter aunt? These thoughts wouldn't let go of me, and looking at the message from my mom, I finally realized that the time had come. The moment my fingers touched the keys, I started typing the answer, which this time didn't contain any hint of silence. I looked at the screen, and it was as if the universe itself had been given this opportunity, the opportunity to say what I want, how I feel that I am no longer ready to be the one who constantly gives in. This year's trip is going to be a lot of fun, Julia. You're writing to us again, aren't you? I have booked 2 rooms, one for the children and one for us, the message said. And I took a deep breath and answered, not allowing myself to hesitate, "Thank you, Mom. But this year I'll drive myself. I've already booked a room." Inside me, as if on a deep level, there was a feeling that this was my little act of liberation, although I still felt my hands shaking and my heart beating faster with excitement. Less than 3 minutes later, my mom called me. Her voice sounded worried, with hints of surprise and, would say, irritation. "Julia, what are you saying? Why book a private room?" Sounded a familiar tone that I've known since childhood. "I've already arranged everything," she continued, as if it were an indisputable fact, as if my wishes didn't matter. But I continued to stand my ground, not giving in, not allowing myself to become someone who hides behind other people's expectations again. "Mom, I want my own personal space. Last year, I barely had a minute to myself. I need a real vacation," I said, and there was a hardness in my voice that had previously been foreign to me. She stopped talking. There was silence, and in that silence, I felt her voice drop, and disappointment wafted out of it. "But that means you're separating from your family. Melissa will have to take care of the children herself. And who will help her when she needs a break?" Came the question, which had so much hidden guilt that I could drown in those words. But I didn't look into it. "I'm not a babysitter, Mom," I said calmly but firmly. "I'm working. I earn my own money. I'm an adult, and this time I won't repeat last year's mistake." These words hung in the air, as if I had given myself permission to be myself, not tied to expectations and requests. That evening, Melissa sent me a long emotional message that stirred up all the things I was trying to hide in myself. She wrote that she was depressed, tired, and feeling betrayed because I wasn't acting the way I used to. She reminded me that I'm still single and I don't have children, so helping is the least I can do. I read her words and felt something inside me snap. "I just wanted us all to have a fun family vacation, and now you're acting like you've been deeply offended," she added. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. It was hard. I needed time not to act under the influence of anger, to realize that I could no longer be who they wanted me to be. While my own feelings, desires, and needs have always come last, it's time to realize that I don't have to be the one who sacrifices myself to please everyone. A few days later, Dad called. He wasn't angry, but he sounded worried. "Are you really planning to travel separately?" he asked. "Yes, Dad. I've booked a hotel nearby, but a private room. I'll join the group activities, but I want to decide the rest myself," I replied, feeling the words coming out of my throat with difficulty. "Melissa is very upset, you know." "I used to be upset too, Dad." She was very upset, but no one seemed to notice. I thought he was going to try to convince me, but he just sighed. I realized that for him, I also remained the same daughter, the same person with whom everything always went the same way. He wasn't trying to judge me, he was just concerned that I had dared to choose myself instead of continuing to play my role in their family. 3 days later, Melissa sent a message to a group chat. It is impossible to misunderstand. Spend your personal vacation, Julia, but don't expect your family to be happy if you skip everything just because you want freedom. You can't do that. Her words sounded like a sentence. I didn't answer right away because I felt like I wanted to retreat, but something in my inner voice told me that I couldn't go back. I have added an additional layer of privacy protection to my hotel booking. I've mapped out my entire schedule, a coastal craft workshop, sunrise, and, of course, a day at my favorite gallery. This trip won't involve babysitting or swallowing your frustration. I spent my entire 20 years trying to please others by keeping things in order, while my own needs were constantly pushed aside. They'll hear me this time. On the eve of departure, Mom sent the last message. We will be waiting for you at the bus stop, as planned. Even if you don't come with us, I hope you'll come anyway. I read it in silence. I don't hate them. I just refuse to continue playing a role that has been exhausting me for many years. I left early at dawn. The air was cool and fresh. My suitcase was lying neatly on the back seat. My favorite playlist was playing softly. I smiled. For the first time, I was heading somewhere for myself and not for someone else. And on this vacation, no matter what happens, I won't let anyone put me on the back burner. This is my journey, and I will live every moment of it. I had just checked into the hotel when the phone rang. I didn't have to look to find out who it was. I took a deep breath and answered, knowing that this call was not just an accident, but an inevitable continuation of what I had already tried to keep quiet about. Where are you? Melissa's familiar voice rang out, cold as steel. I wasn't surprised by her tone, and I didn't try to understand the emotions behind his icy hardness. I just checked in, I said, trying to stay calm, even though everything inside me was on fire. Melissa has always been able to turn any conversation into a battlefield, and today was no exception. A private room? As I told you, she added, as if trying to emphasize her rightness, her role, as if I had to justify my decisions. A private room? She sounded like she was ready to raise her hand to strike. Nevertheless, I did not succumb to the provocation. I did not allow these cold words to overshadow my own feelings. She laughed, a harsh, joyless sound, like someone tired of life. Julia, are you seriously doing this? Will you turn our family vacation into your personal vacation? And I, sighing again, calmly replied, no, I still join group activities, but I also have the right to relax in my own way. I felt like each of my phrases was becoming a strong barrier between me and what was expected of me. I can't believe it, Melissa snapped, not even giving me a chance to continue. I'm juggling 3 kids. Josh is always at work, and Mom and Dad are not getting any younger. Who do you think will help me if you just disappear like that? I closed my eyes, lost in myself, in my feelings, trying to figure out why everything hurts so much. Melissa, I'm not going to disappear, I said, but there was something bitter in those words, like raindrops falling on an old tree. I just won't be a free assistant like last year. I'm not 19 anymore. And these are not just numbers, these are my experiences, my understanding that I deserve a vacation, I deserve a life for myself, and not just for others. But she continued, not letting me breathe, but you're still alone. There are no children, no real responsibilities except for myself. And that's when her voice became as sharp as a knife blade, cutting away everything I was trying to keep inside. You have so much free time, Julia, and I have. She almost shouted these words, full of resentment. I just need a little help. Quite a bit. Is that too much? I felt something tighten in my chest, and I gripped the phone tighter. I'm not your backup plan for burnout, I said, and there was a determination in those words that I'd wanted to find in myself for a long time. I have a job, a life. I need a break too, Melissa. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard her sigh, then an expressionless sob that echoed in my heart. Melissa began to cry. I'm exhausted, Julia. I haven't had a single night of normal sleep. You're free, relaxed, and I'm stuck in this endless cycle of fatigue, and you can't sacrifice even a little bit to help me. I was silent, and in that silence I felt my nerves tighten like strings ready to snap. But I didn't back down. In those moments, it was important for me not to bend over. You chose motherhood. I respect that. But you can't expect me to sacrifice my life just because you're unhappy with the one you've chosen. And that's when I realized that no matter what she said, she didn't realize that I also had a right to my life, to my boundaries. So now it's all about you? I asked coldly. No, it's about knowing your limits, I replied, but I felt those words begin to weigh heavily on my soul. I realized that if I didn't protect them, no one would. And this moment, when you realize that it's time to become strong for yourself, it was just like that. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone, and was silent, feeling her tears become mine, but I didn't give in. The call ended in silence. I hung up the phone, and my heart was still pounding with excitement. I knew Melissa would tell Mom, and I knew the storm hadn't subsided yet. Sure enough, Mom called an hour later. She didn't scream, but her voice was full of frustration, as if the whole world had given up at that moment. Julia, what are you doing? She asked, and I felt as if those words split me in half. Melissa is really hurt. Couldn't you be a little more flexible? I exhaled, trying to find the strength to respond. Mom, I said slowly. Last year I showed maximum flexibility. I sacrificed my time, my energy, my freedom. I didn't even sleep properly. And in all that time, you never once asked if I was okay. You were just asking if I could help Melissa. She was silent, and in that silence I heard everything that needed to be said. I love this family, but I'm tired of being the one everyone ignores. If you see me as just a temporary solution to other people's problems, then I don't need this vacation. Mom sighed. You've changed, Julia. I've grown up, Mom, I replied, feeling these words echo in my soul. I didn't know if they really understood me or if they just thought I was rebelling. But one thing I knew for sure, this was the first time I hadn't backed down under family pressure. And no matter what happened next, I was no longer the kind of person who said yes just to keep the peace. That evening, I walked alone along the beach. The sunset lit up the sky with golden light, and I felt this warm light smoothly plunge me into something much deeper than just the evening silence. The ocean breeze ruffled my hair, and I felt a strange, peaceful clarity. It was as if the whole world had suddenly become so simple and understandable that everything superfluous had receded, leaving only what was really important. I knew I could upset people, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for my actions. I wasn't betraying myself, and the feeling was so strong that I almost couldn't believe it. After all, before, in moments of doubt, I always tried to please, for the sake of my family, in order not to destroy relationships, in order not to be judged. But now, despite all the differences, I felt that it was me and only me who should be in the first place in my life. I never thought that I would post something personal online, especially about my family. But after talking to my mom and Melissa's passive-aggressive messages, I felt depressed. I didn't have the strength to remain silent anymore, because I was so tired of my silent self-denial that I just couldn't continue in the same spirit. I needed to say something, not to vent my emotions, but to clear my mind. I wasn't looking for sympathy, I didn't need pity, but I knew that if I didn't speak out, they wouldn't understand me. So, I created an anonymous account on Reddit, went to the life stories section and wrote. I told them about last year's vacation, and how I had to sleep with 3 children while my sister rented a separate room. I explained that my family considered me available only because I was single and not a mother, as if that gave them the right to my unconditional help. I didn't reveal any details, I didn't mention any names or locations, but I honestly told my story, my truth. In the end, I asked. Am I wrong if I want to take a real vacation? I didn't expect it to cause such a response, but within a few hours there were hundreds of comments, and most of them supported me. Some said that I was too patient, others argued that I should have put an end to it long ago. It was a strange feeling when you open up your feelings, your pain in front of strangers, and they respond to it in a way that your own family could never respond to. Many people told similar stories, in which self-sacrifice was considered a duty, and independence was seen as selfishness. I read every comment and felt both relieved and sad. I am relieved that I am not alone, that other people understand me, and sad that many of us had to move into secondary roles in our own lives, in a life that belonged to others and not to us. And then something happened that I never expected. Melissa saw the post. She called me at 6 a.m. the next day, when I was drinking coffee on the hotel balcony, watching the sunrise. "Did you write that?" she demanded, her voice harsh, and in it I heard all the things she hadn't told me in her messages, all the accusations she was hiding behind her polite facade. I remained calm. "Did you find out that it was me?" I asked, but no longer with the desire to justify myself. "How could I not find out? Do you think you're anonymous? You've described everything in detail. Who wouldn't know that it was about me?" She almost shouted these words, full of resentment and rage. "I didn't name anyone, Melissa. I said that people react to what they read," I replied, trying not to get into an endless argument. "And what I wrote was true." There was a pause. Then she began to cry, this time not from pain, but from rage. "You've ruined my image, Julia. You humiliated me in front of the whole world." I didn't answer because she was worried about the image, not the truth. It was always important to her how things looked, not how people felt. It was clear to me that the most important thing for her was to save face, not to deal with what really happened. 3 hours later, I received a text from my mom. "Did you really do that? Have you posted information about our family online?" I replied, "Yes, Mom, because if I hadn't spoken out, no one would have listened to me." At first she was angry. She said I was ungrateful and had hurt my sister. But then she started reading not only the post, but also the comments. The stranger's words, clear, fair, and unbiased, turned out to be more convincing than anything I've ever heard from my family. By evening, she called again, her voice quieter and softer. "I didn't think people would take it that way. I thought you were exaggerating." I asked, not without challenge, "How many times have I exaggerated, Mom?" But no one listened until someone else said the same thing. And I suddenly realized that this whole story is not just about me, not just about Melissa and Mom. This is a story about how we all remain invisible until someone says out loud what has been hiding inside for so long. I haven't heard from Melissa since that call. But Dad called. He was brief. "Your mom and I were just talking to your sister. We all need to have a normal conversation. But I want you to know that I'm sorry that I didn't understand all this sooner." I was stunned. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard Dad apologize. That night, I received a text from an unexpected person. Josh, Melissa's husband, wrote to me, and his words, although written calmly, still threw me into confusion. "I'm sorry that I let you take advantage of you," his text began. It took me a moment to understand what he wanted to say, because this man, even though he was my sister's husband, always kept in the shadow of her control, never intervened in our family matters, preferring to remain a bystander. "I'm talking to Melissa. I think she needs to change." His words, uttered not in a quarrel, but rather with a cold analysis of the situation, made me feel something that had been unavailable to me for so long: support. It was the first recognition that at least someone in our family sees me, understands, and is ready not to protect, but to acknowledge my feelings. For the first time in many years, I felt that someone in my family really supported me, not out of a sense of duty, not for the sake of peace, but because they saw the truth. It wasn't just a simple encouragement, it was a recognition that I wasn't wrong. 2 days after my post went viral, my mom called again. There was no previous wariness in her voice, only a kind of weariness. She sent a short but succinct message. "Julia, the vacation is cancelled." Those words didn't hit me the way I expected. I froze, not from shock, but just from an unexpected wave of emotions that overwhelmed me. Part of me felt relieved because this family tension was finally starting to dissipate, but the other part felt sad. I've been dreaming so much about this vacation, about getting away from everyone and finally getting a taste of freedom. After so many sacrifices, after many years of patience and silence, I have been waiting for this moment for myself for so long. But instead of getting my freedom, I had to pay for the truth, which was revealed too quickly and too loudly. I realized that you always need to tell the truth in your own language, and it can be loud, painful, and at some point destructive. "Melissa hasn't really talked to anyone since your post." It sounded like a sentence, but I no longer felt the pain. Mom sighed into the phone and continued, "Josh was so upset that he went to live with his parents in Olympia." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to sympathize. "Your father and me. We need time to think about everything." That one sentence made it clear to me that things had gone much further than I had imagined. It was as if Mom and Dad were on the wrong side of the fence, on the side that I was once ready to support them on, for the sake of peace, for the sake of family. But now, all these words, even if they were uttered with good intentions, seemed to me like a call to silence, to return to my former role, the role of a convenient family member who has no right to his own pain. I got a text from Josh that night. He offered to meet. "I would like to meet in person, just you and me. Not through Melissa, not through your parents." I agreed because I felt that this conversation might clarify everything. We met at a quiet cafe near my hotel, and Josh arrived on time. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and calm, without the usual sly grins or attempts to justify himself. No awkward avoidance, which I used to see at family dinners when no one knew how to behave with those who stopped pleasing everyone around them. "Thank you for having the courage to speak out," he said as soon as he sat down, and I felt his words smack of sincerity. I didn't think I would feel grateful to this man, but at that moment, despite all my guilt towards myself, I understood that he had said exactly what I needed to hear. I knew Melissa had control issues, but I didn't realize it. I didn't even have to ask to understand what he was talking about. I knew he was referring to money, her inappropriate demands, and the manipulations they had always considered the norm. "I don't blame you," I said softly but firmly. "But it's hard to believe you didn't notice." Josh shook his head. "She told me that she gave you money, even described it in detail. The cash is in an envelope left on the kitchen table." I laughed dryly. If there was an envelope, it must have been meant for someone else. He didn't understand right away, but I continued. "I checked the bank statements and asked Melissa directly. She admitted that she only gave you money for pizza a couple of times. She kept the rest for herself." I nodded, no longer angry, just deeply disappointed. "I love Melissa, Julia, but I'm not going to let her wipe her feet on you just because you talk less." I looked him straight in the eye. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "Make her apologize properly and give you back everything she owes you." I didn't answer right away. My mother's words echoed in my head. In the family, we have to be the ones who bend over. But what I was doing wasn't because I didn't love my family. It was because I finally decided to love myself. The next morning, as if to confirm all my decisions, Melissa showed up at my hotel. Her eyes were red, as if she wasn't even trying to hide her tears, and she was holding an envelope in her hands, which she seemed to have brought not only as a wife, but also as a debtor. Josh stood behind her, arms folded, as if his presence was meant to be an assurance of her seriousness. "I'm sorry," she said in such a low voice that it was barely audible, and it became clear to me that all these words of hers were not an apology, but rather a confession that she had to utter in order to somehow mitigate the consequences. For taking advantage of your kindness, for lying, and for turning a family vacation into a stage to control you." I was silent, not knowing what to say. She handed me an envelope. "This is the money I owe you." Every cent. Josh made me count everything. I didn't open it, I just looked at her, still holding back my emotions, and asked, "Do you think everything can go back to how it was?" She shook her head. "No way. And I think maybe that's a good thing." I felt the corners of my mouth turn up slightly, not knowing if it was a smile or something more bittersweet. "I need help," Melissa added, and I realized that she no longer needed support, but forgiveness. Josh advised me to start seeing a therapist, and although I wasn't sure if I could fix it, I agreed. I felt like I had to do something to avoid getting caught up in this endless struggle, in this relationship that had long since become unbearable. "You don't have to fix everything in one day," Josh said, and I couldn't help but notice how his words, in their simplicity and wisdom, touched the very depths of my soul. "But if you start respecting other people, especially the quiet ones, that's more than enough." Melissa nodded, and I saw in her eyes a shadow of what I had previously thought was unchangeable, a confidence that bordered on cruelty. But today, for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like a powerful older sister standing on a pedestal. She looked like a woman trying to rediscover herself after a long series of mistakes, a woman who may have finally realized that her path to true strength does not lie through manipulation and devaluation of others, but through awareness and recognition of her weaknesses. And the vacation, although it didn't go as planned, gave me more than any beach party or sunset. It gave me clarity. It gave Melissa a mirror, and my whole family a chance to change, or at least start learning about it. 3 weeks after the cancellation of my first vacation, my dad called me. He didn't say anything, just gently suggested, "Julia, my mom and I would like to invite you to dinner at your favorite restaurant, Pines, this Saturday." I hesitated for a second, then nodded, even though they couldn't see me, because every day I trusted my feelings and their desire for a normal family life less and less. Maybe after all this, we all needed a dinner without arguments, without accusations, just to start over. I didn't know what would come of it, but deep down I hoped that this evening could be something more than just a gastronomic meeting. That evening, when I entered the restaurant, my mother got up first and pulled out a chair for me. This had never happened before, and it seemed like an incredibly important gesture, as if we could really become those who respect each other, who are willing not only to follow roles, but also to be people whose words and deeds can become sincere. Dad smiled awkwardly, like a teacher from a small town who had just stumbled in a lecture, and despite everything, I felt some tenderness and respect in that smile. "We're really sorry," Mom said even before the snacks were served. Her words were like a cold shower that, despite all my guilt, I was ready to plunge into. "For belittling your feelings, for putting a burden on you that you've never had to bear." I looked at her, and for the first time she seemed smaller to me. Not by status, but by the way she spoke from the bottom of her heart, and not by her role as an adult woman in the family, as if for the first time she looked at me as a person, and not as someone who should always be a support. It was painful, but at the same time, it was very important to realize that she might also have begun to see me, not as an element that she had to fix, but as a person with her own right to feelings and freedom. "We are planning another trip," the Pope added, and there was no previous severity in his voice, only gentleness. "This time, you can travel separately, live separately, and join only those you want to. No one will ask you to look after the children. We promise." It was a big step forward for me, because my family's whole life has always been built on pleasing and fulfilling someone's demands. I asked. Mom glanced at Dad, then said, "She's in counseling." Josh convinced her. And, to be honest, she's starting to realize that she needs to change. I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the years when I'd made compromises, shouldering responsibilities that weren't mine. Part of me was still afraid that all those promises would disappear like the morning mist, but the other part of me wanted to try to believe again, to believe that everything wasn't in vain, that we could all change. "Okay," I nodded. "I'll go," But I'm driving myself, I'll book my room, and if someone tries to put me back in the role of my aunt's babysitter, I'll leave. Without warning. We understand, Dad said, and Mom nodded softly, not knowing what to say in response. It was too important for all of us. A week later, the family group chat came to life with a new name, the reset version of a trip to the beach. Everyone tried to keep things light, as if replacing old habits with new ones. Even Melissa, although she only sent emoticons, there were no more instructions and demands like before. She didn't try to influence the course of events, she didn't try to remind me of her desires. I quietly booked a hotel half a mile from the main location, close enough for dinners but far enough away to have my own space. On the morning of my departure, I woke up early, made coffee, packed my car, and left town before sunrise. No one called and did not rush me. There were no messages from my mother with a question, "Are you on your way?" No reminders from Melissa. For the first time, I felt like a real adult in my own family. Upon arrival, I checked in and asked the front desk staff not to share my room information with anyone other than law enforcement officers in case of an emergency. The receptionist smiled pleasantly. Many guests do this. "You're okay." I smiled back. I've learned that setting boundaries is not a challenge. It's self-respect. That day, we met at a seafood restaurant on the beach, where the transparent windows offered a view of the ocean stretching to the horizon, and the rustle of the waves softly complemented our awkward silence, as if nature itself was trying to ease the tension between us. Everyone was there. Mom and Dad were sitting at a long table against the wall. The boys were spinning around the chairs, overwhelmed with excitement from the change of scenery, and Melissa came with Josh and, to my surprise, for the first time brought with her a hired babysitter, a young woman named Ava, cheerful, energetic and obviously professional, who seemed she easily coped with the triplets of the boys, without becoming hysterical from their every shout or prank. "Thank you for coming," Melissa said without any strings attached. Her voice was even, almost neutral, and there was no hidden reproaches, hidden expectations, or the usual tension that always hovered between us in this brief greeting. I nodded, feeling that maybe, just maybe, something had really changed, and that now I was facing not a sister who required unconditional support, but a woman who was learning to be independent and respect the boundaries of others. Throughout the evening, no one mentioned last year, no one recalled that endless series of insults and omissions, no one asked me to take the children to the toilet or help them feed them, no one tried to pull me into the usual role of a rescuer. I sat next to my dad, who seemed genuinely happy to see me not as an assistant, but just as a daughter, as an adult woman with her own life. I told him about the design project I was doing for a boutique hotel in the city center, how I chose fabrics, wallpaper, furniture, creating a space that would reflect both sophistication and homely comfort, and Dad listened attentively, as if my words finally had the same meaning as "and that's all Melissa ever said." It was strange, but surprisingly pleasant, to feel that I was seen, heard, respected. When dinner was over, I quietly returned to my hotel, not feeling the usual burden of guilt or responsibilities. No one was watching me, no one was holding me back, and when I opened the door to my room, I was enveloped in the very feeling I had dreamed of for years, a real world, quiet, free, belonging only to me. On the second day of the trip, I woke up in a quiet hotel room. Soft sunlight penetrated through the curtains, gently coloring the walls in golden tones, and it seemed that the whole world had finally come to a standstill in respectful silence. I made coffee, turned on some light music, and sat on the balcony with a book I just bought at a small local store, flipping through the pages leisurely, as if enjoying every word, every moment of my long-awaited freedom. For the first time in many years, my vacation didn't start with someone shouting my name in the hallway or children knocking on my door early in the morning, demanding attention and help. Everything was quiet, harmonious and, most importantly, belonged only to me. After the buffet breakfast at the hotel, I received a message from my mom. "This afternoon we are heading to the seaside park. Would you like to join us?" I answered simply, without promises, without unnecessary pressure, "I'll come back later when I finish my work." And there was not a drop of guilt in those words, not the slightest desire to please, Just my own decision, free from obligations. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I visited the local art gallery, the one I had been wanting to see since last year, and wandered among the paintings, studying every brushstroke, every color chord, as if piecing together the part of myself that I had been forgetting for so long. For the first time, I felt that this vacation really belongs to me, that I am here not as a service staff, not as an endless helper, but as a woman who has earned the right to be happy. When I was leaving the gallery and planning to have coffee on the beach, my phone rang. It was Ava, the babysitter Melissa had hired. "Hello, Julia. Sorry to call, but Melissa asked me to look after the boys for about 15 minutes. She said, it's urgent." I didn't answer right away. A chill ran down my spine, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my thoughts, not to let panic overwhelm me. "Ava, I think you're wonderful," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm and firm. "But I'm not a babysitter. If Melissa has something urgent, she should have planned it in advance or taken other measures." "Yes, I understand. I'm just doing what she told me to do." "It's all right. You're doing your job." "Thanks for calling," Ava said, and I felt a light weight slip off my shoulders. I hung up the phone, and then immediately texted Josh, "Your sister is trying to give me the kids again, this time through Ava." 2 minutes later, Josh called, and his voice couldn't hide his disappointment. "Thank you for telling me." "I'll deal with it," he replied shortly. The day I was a little late for the seaside park, the energy changed. Melissa didn't look at me, absorbed in her own thoughts, and Josh was playing soccer with the boys, easy and fun, without tension. Mom came up to me with lemonade and said softly, "We heard about what happened earlier." "I'm sorry." Melissa should have known better. I just nodded, realizing that I wasn't here to continue arguing or proving my case. I was here to be honest with myself. While the family was relaxing in the shade of the trees, at the very moment when the sun turned the sand into copper shades, Melissa finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, without sarcasm, without complaints, without the usual aggression, just a simple, clean sentence. "Thank you for not making a scene earlier." I looked at her calm and steady expression on her face, which was so different from the tense, always defensive Melissa I had known before, and in that look I realized that I didn't need to raise my voice for someone to understand what not to do, that sometimes strength is not about volume, but about calm confidence, a simple but firm no said when it's really necessary. I had said enough, and not a single word was needed to complement this silence, which in itself became our new form of communication. Josh nodded silently, quietly confirming that he had heard and understood, and there was more support in this movement of his head than in the most eloquent speeches. And from that moment on, no one else raised the issue of a few minutes of help. No one tried to return me to the role I had so hard refused. The following days passed peacefully, as if the atmosphere itself had changed, filled with the respect and lightness that I had been striving for so long. I walked alone through the narrow streets lined with uneven tiles, enjoying the sound of the surf in my ears, went into coastal cafes that smelled of freshly baked bread and salt, and even made friends with a local artist, a bright woman named Clara, who invited me to join her painting session outdoors, under the open sky, where the wind blew. I played with the colors on the palette and the sun illuminated every stroke. When the family organized group events, dinners, visits to the aquarium or barbecue on the beach, I joined them on my own terms, with pleasure, without coercion, feeling that now I choose my own moments of presence, without losing myself or dissolving into other people's expectations. I didn't avoid them, but I also didn't allow myself to return to my old role. I didn't allow myself to become comfortable and inconspicuous again. On the last day of our vacation, the whole family gathered on the beach, where the sunset cast golden light on the waves, coloring the sand in warm honey tones, and the air was filled with a light coolness that promised the proximity of evening. Melissa sat next to me for the first time, without burying her face in her phone, without chasing the children, and her presence was quiet, without tension, almost peaceful. "You really have changed," she said softly, looking at the horizon, as if afraid to meet my eyes, as if these words were no less a test for her than for me. And I think I'm starting to learn to accept that, she added after a short pause that made more sense than 1,000 explanations. I smiled without saying anything, because I knew that real change does not come from promises or words. It happens when you firmly say no, even if you are misunderstood, even if you are accused of selfishness, because, after all, your life belongs to you. This vacation wasn't perfect, but it was the first time I felt truly free around my family, not because they had completely changed, but because I was the first to change and preserve my boundaries, learn to talk about my needs and protect them without guilt. After the trip, I returned to my design studio and to my usual rhythm, plunging back into projects, sketches, and meetings, but deep down I knew that something had changed forever, that I would never again allow others to dictate who I should be and how I should live. Not only for me, but also for my family, something has become different, a subtle but tangible shift in perception and attitude. One day, on a weekday afternoon, when I was organizing drafts for a new hotel project, I received a short email from Josh with the headline, "Update on Melissa." I opened it, not expecting much, but the first lines made me freeze. "This morning, I took Melissa to her first therapy session. It wasn't easy, but she reacted differently than before. She was listening," he wrote. Josh said that the therapist said something that left both him and Melissa speechless. Being a mother doesn't mean you lose your identity, but it also doesn't give you the right to force others to take on your responsibilities. According to Josh, Melissa cried for half of the session when she realized that she had used motherhood as an excuse to control others, especially me, and reading this, I felt strangely relieved and bitter at the same time, because even realizing your mistakes requires courage, and forgiveness, even more. At the end of the letter, Josh wrote, "I'm sorry that things have gone so far, but thank you. If you hadn't had your way, Melissa might never have looked at herself." I didn't answer right away, not out of coldness or anger, but because I just needed a moment of silence to feel something rare, the growth of the very person who used to make me feel invisible, and the realization that my efforts, my struggle, were not in vain. 2 weeks later, Melissa sent me a text asking me to have lunch with her. At first, I hesitated, remembering all those moments when our meetings ended with reproaches and accusations, but then I agreed, because I understood that the chance for a real change should not be missed. We met at a small cafe near the park where she took the children, and this time everything was different. No children, no interference, just the two of us, two women who could finally speak honestly. For the first time in many years, she arrived on time, without any requests or complaints. "I've already attended 4 sessions," Melissa began, her voice low but confident, and there was real remorse in it. "And every time I realize that I've never listened to anyone. Not Josh, not Mom and Dad, and especially you," she said, and I let her speak without interrupting, because I knew that sometimes the best thing you can give a person is the opportunity to be heard. "I think being the eldest and being the only adult in the house for a while, I used to think that everything should revolve around me," she added, and I saw in her eyes something I had never seen before, a sincere willingness to change. "When I had children, I panicked," Melissa confessed softly, her voice trembling not from fear, but from sincerity, rare and almost painful for her, and instead of asking for help, as it should be, I just waited for it, especially from you, as if it were something that goes without saying. I nodded slightly, accepting her words, but at the same time knowing deep down that understanding does not mean acceptance, that acceptance means acceptance, and I was no longer going to give up. "And you shouldn't have accepted it," Melissa said firmly, her lips trembling, and her eyes filled with that strange light that comes only when a person looks at himself without illusions for the first time in a long time, and then she smiled sadly, as if she herself felt the bitterness of her confessions. "Last week," she continued, straightening up in her chair as if trying to find a new, as yet uncertain resilience, "Josh hired a full-time babysitter. Ava will help with school deliveries and teach children basic life skills, which, as I now understand, cannot be passed on to others, as I shifted my fears and fatigue to you. I'm not asking for your help anymore. I just hope that one day you'll see that I'm changing." I stared at her for a long time, studying her face, the lines of fatigue around her eyes, the slightly slumped shoulders, and the voice devoid of its former prickly pride. I could see the fatigue, but there was no old pride, there was no arrogance, which she always used to hide her insecurities. Instead, there was something real, the humility, the clarity that comes after being depressed for too long, after pretending for too long. From that day on, events began to develop in a new direction, slowly but surely, as if old gears, frozen by rust, began to move again, not without creaking, not without effort, but still moving. Mom called me every week, but she always started with a question, "Are you free?" And if I said no, she respected it. There were no more pretentious requests. There were no more expectations that I would give up everything for the convenience of the family. Dad started sending me photos of a garden bench that he made himself, instead of asking me to do it for him, and in these short messages I felt not only proud of my achievements, but also respect for my time, for my life. As for Melissa, she was still learning to be just a sister, not a commander, not a general in her home uniform, and although sometimes the old instincts returned, flaring up in short bursts of habitual authority, I now knew how to keep the line, and she learned to stop before crossing it. I kept a healthy distance, not to stay away, not out of fear, but because I was rebuilding the bridge, with stronger supports, with clearer boundaries, but wide enough for both sides to meet if we both decided to cross it. When autumn came, I received a handwritten postcard from Melissa, just one sentence, written in a familiar rounded handwriting that I remembered from school, from the time when we wrote notes to each other in class. "Thank you for not being silent forever," the caption read. I held the card in my hands for a long time, not because I was stunned, but because I knew that this was not the end of the story. It was only the first conscious step, a sign that now she was ready to learn to hear. But at least now I won't be the only one who listens without being heard, and for me it was a great start to any change, no matter how long and difficult the path may be. About a month after returning from vacation, I received an unexpected message on Instagram. The letter was from Emily, a woman who worked in a small bookstore on the corner, where I often spent weekends lost among the pages, finding solace in the smell of new books and in the gentle, unobtrusive company of people who never demanded that I be someone else. "Hello, Julia. I don't know if it's a coincidence or fate, but I read that post on Reddit and realized it was you," her message began. My heart skipped a beat, not out of shame, not out of fear of being recognized, but because I never expected anyone from my real life to get into a story that started with disappointment and ended with self-acceptance. Emily always attracted my attention, not because she was bright and defiant, but rather on the contrary. Her calmness, her patient smile with which she presented each book, made her special, a person who sees through others without needing unnecessary words. Always kind, never shallow, I wrote back, feeling a warm wave of gratitude rise in my chest. As a person who sees through people without needing additional words, I added, "I think this post has spread further than I thought," I confessed in the next message, not trying to hide my surprise that a personal story told anonymously resonated with so many people. She answered almost immediately. It happened because it was real, and because so many people were Julia in their own families, but they still couldn't find the right words, she wrote, and I stared at the phone screen for a long time, feeling tears tickle my eyes not from pain, but from a strange, quiet happiness. The happiness of being understood, finally being seen for who you are. We agreed to meet next weekend at an open art exhibition in the city center, where in the noise of passers-by, in the rustle of autumn leaves underfoot and in quiet conversations between rows of paintings, it was easy to get lost and just as easy to find the very lightness that you always look for in communicating with those who really understand you. Nothing formal, no expectations, no responsibilities, just two people walking side by side, talking about art, books, and boundaries that everyone should learn to set from an early age so that one day they don't end up being a stranger to themselves, losing their lives in an effort to meet other people's expectations. I didn't tell Emily about how many sleepless nights I spent because of a careless remark from one of my family members. I didn't remember every silent insult. I didn't open old wounds. But I told her how I once learned to remain silent, suppressing my own feelings for the sake of someone else's comfort, and how I finally, in the end, I had to relearn how to speak, hear my voice, and respect it. She listened to me without judgment, without hasty advice, without interrupting or imposing her point of view. She was just there, And in this silence of her presence there was more support than in the most eloquent speeches. And then she said one thing that I will never forget. You are not selfish, Julia. You just love yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. These words became a small beacon for me, illuminating the part of me that was still afraid to be myself, afraid that self-love would be followed by condemnation, rejection, loneliness. That's how my relationship with Emily gradually began, without pressure, without haste, without the need to heal each other or save each other, just presence, listening, and mutual respect, which allowed everyone to be themselves without fear or guilt. As for my family, things were moving in the right direction in their own way, not in a rush of change, but in a slow, almost imperceptible movement towards something better. Melissa continued therapy, discovering new sides of herself that had previously been hidden behind walls of expectations and responsibilities. Our conversations were no longer tense, they became softer, more honest, freer. One day, she even sent me photos of watercolor paintings that she had drawn in an art lesson, light landscapes full of air and color. As if using a brush she was releasing the heaviness that she had been carrying for years. Instead of controlling, I learned to let go, allowing everyone to go their own way without the desire to change or adjust to themselves. Josh now paid more attention to the children, and every Sunday he took them hiking, walking in the park, giving Melissa time to get some air or just be herself a little, without the endless role of mother and wife. My parents also learned an important lesson from my long silence. They no longer sent messages with a demanding "can you help?" Instead they wrote, "If you want to join us for dinner, we will be glad to see you," and it might seem like a small thing, an imperceptible change, but for me it was like a new way to breathe freely, without fear of being consumed by the needs of others. I still stayed in my room when I arrived, I still said no when I was tired, and I still chose the world instead of trying to please everyone at once, knowing that there was no selfishness or coldness in it, only mature self-love. One early autumn evening, when the wind brought with it the smell of wet leaves and the porch lights cast a soft glow around us, Emily leaned against my shoulder on a wooden bench in the backyard, and turned to me and asked, "Do you think your family really understands this?" I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers penetrate to the very depths of my heart. "They don't have to understand everything, the main thing is that they respect it," I replied quietly. And this time, I think they finally succeeded. My story is not a miracle, not a story where dramatic transformations happen overnight and everything suddenly becomes perfect. There is no touching ending where everything gets better instantly, but this is a real journey, during which I learned to stand my ground, learned to love others, starting with kindness to myself, and not with self-sacrifice. And if someone had asked me what had changed the deeply ingrained family dynamics over the years, I would have simply replied that I stopped saying yes to the things that were breaking me and started living as if I deserved it. My story is not just a story about regaining the right to rest, it is a reminder that prolonged silence can become a burden, difficult and destructive. I used to be the easiest to talk to in my family, the most accommodating, the most wordless, until one day I realized that love should not be accompanied by unconditional sacrifice. Today I have my own life, a healthy relationship, and a family that is gradually learning to love without control, learning to accept without absorbing, and respect without demanding. I'm not a free babysitter anymore. I am me, whole and independent. And if you had asked me today what I think about my path, I would have answered without hesitation, I am proud of myself. What do you think about Julia's journey? Was she too persistent, or did she do the right thing to protect herself in the end? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn even more interesting stories about family and personal boundaries.